in the green suburb of Sri Lanka, where mango trees provided shade and the monsoon rains quickly turned the ground green. Three Sri Lankan brothers grew up together. Appa often advised, while tapping his business records, "Stay united. A divided family loses its strength." Rohan, eldest brother, steady and proud, trained as an engineer. Practical, slow to anger. Nailin, middle brother, warm and sociable, studied commerce. Nailin, quick to laugh, quicker to worry. Sarun, youngest, dreamy and clever, studied literature. Imaginative, sometimes indecisive. Uma and Appa were educated parents who established a successful small export business. They taught their sons the importance of unity, honesty, and valuing the family business. One day, Appa and Aman arranged wonderful wedding for Rohan, married with Layla, Priya with Nailin, and Maya with Layla, Rohan's wife, graceful and composed, speaks softly, but plans sharply. Priya, Nailin's wife, charming and attentive, always helpful in public, quietly strategic. Maya, Suren's wife, clever and warm, a master of small gestures that shift a room's mood. "Stay together," Appa would say, tapping the ledger, an advice in the morning. A house divided is a house that loses its shade. Rohan, Nailin, and Saran took those words to heart. They worked the family business together after university. Rohan kept the machines running. Nailin handled accounts and clients, and Saran wrote the letters that charmed buyers overseas. And the three new brides were welcomed like daughters. For years, the shop prospered, and the brothers prospered with it. When each married Rohan to Layla, Nailin to Priya, Suren to Maya, the village celebrated. The weddings were bright with jasmine and lacquered beetle. At first, life was as Uma had hoped. The brothers shared meals, decisions, and the small joys of a joint household. But the world has a way of testing even the best intentions. Dessous wives were clever women, each kind, each polite, each careful never to quarrel in public. They never insulted one another. Instead, they used the smallest of things: on unfinished cup of tea left on a table, a folded letter placed where only one brother would find it, a casual remark about who had been late to a meeting to nudge the brothers' minds like a breeze nudges a row of candles. Layla would leave a note about a late shipment on Rohan's desk and mention Priya would laugh with Nailin about a joke that hinted at favoritism in the office. Maya would arrange the morning tea so that Suren found a stray receipt that suggested someone else had taken a commission. Each act by three wives, by itself, was small and could have been explained away. Together they formed a pattern. The brothers, proud and sensitive in different ways, began to notice differences where none were intended. Old rivalries: who had been given the larger share of study time, who had been praised more by Appa, woke like seeds in the dark. It got into their talks, then even their quiet times. Jealousy is a quiet thief. Meetings that once ended with laughter now ended with clipped nods. Decisions that had been made together were taken alone. One by one, the brothers moved into separate houses close by, but separate, each convinced that he was protecting his family and his share of the business. The three brothers started separate businesses. The export contracts slowed. The business that had been their parents' pride began to wobble. The wives, who had never raised their voices, the brothers' fortunes declined with a calm that hid their satisfaction. They had not needed to shout. The brothers, who had been raised to believe in unity, now found themselves arguing over petty sums and imagined slights. The village watched with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Uma and Appa, who had grown older and quieter, they felt the ache of their teachings forgotten. The downfall of the three brothers' businesses happened slowly. The warehouse, which was once organized and busy, became filled with unpaid bills and unused boxes. Rohan became anxious, Nailin laughed less, and Surin's letters became shorter and angrier. The three houses, once filled with shared meals and stories, became places of distrust. Each blamed his wife for the small hurts that had been inflicted. It was a small thing that began the mending, a monsoon that came late and heavy. Flooding. The low road where the brothers kept a stack of woven mats for an important shipment. The mats were soaked. The buyer called in anger. The brothers, each in his own house, realized that alone they could not lift the crates, dry the goods, or calm the buyer. They called one another, reluctantly at first, then with the old muscle memory of shared labor. They called and sending messages to the buyer, explaining the delay. Oh, in the wet dawn, exhausted and muddy. They sat under the mango tree and remembered how they had once laughed while mending a torn sail. That night, as they drank tea and watched the rain, the truth came like a clear bell. They had been taught to be united, not for the sake of convenience, but because unity was the family's strength. They saw how small manipulations had been stitched into their days and how their pride had let suspicion grow. They thought of Uma's hands, turning pages of the ledger. Nopa's quiet nods, of the way their parents had taught them to share not only profit but responsibility. They felt shame for the way they had let cleverness and fear replace trust. They looked inward, and that made the apology real. Rohan went to Layla and said, simply, I let my pride make a wall. Naylan sit with Priya and said, I should have asked before I believed. Surin Maya's hand and said, I miss the truth for a rumor. Wives, who had been clever in their own ways, wives were surprised by the brothers' humility. They had expected anger, not confession. In the quiet that followed, Layla face softened. Neelan wife feels shame. Surin wife was surprised they had not imagined the harm their small games would cause. They had thought themselves clever, not cruel. Rebuilding began with small, honest acts. The brothers reopened the ledger together. They called their buyers and explained the truth. Mistakes had been made, but they would make them right. They invited Uma and Appa to live under one roof and listen as they promised to keep the business as a shared house again. The wives, seeing the brothers' remorse, offered their own apologies. Some spoken, some shown in steady work at the warehouse and in the market. They learned to speak plainly rather than to nudge. They learned that kindness without cunning was stronger than cleverness without conscience. The villagers watched family knit itself back together. Business returned, not because of a sudden windfall, but because trust is a currency that pays steady interest. Brothers learned to consult one another, to rotate responsibilities, and to keep the ledger open on the table where anyone could see it. They taught their children the same lessons their parents had taught them: unity, honesty, and the courage to admit fault. Years later, when the mango trees were heavy with fruit and the monsoon came on time, the family prospered again. Not by accident, but by the slow, patient work of mending. The three brothers, older, humbler, and closer, sat together at festivals. Their laughter easy, and their hands busy with work. Wives, who had once used small tricks to shift power, now used their cleverness to plan community festivals. Uma and Appa watched from their threshold, their ledger now a book of stories as much as accounts. Appa would tap the cover and say, You see, house that remembers its rules keeps its shade. In Cat, Sri Lankan people still tell the story of the three mango trees, the way they bent together in storms and bore fruit for everyone beneath them.